Yeah, so you won't see over there. Get a cushion in the middle, you'll be fine. So, yeah, Padmasambhava. We're on Padmasambhava Day. So Padmasambhava is interesting in so many ways, but one of the things that's really interesting is that he seems to be a historical figure, but at the same time, most of the things that we know about him are legends and myths. And there's a kind of historical core, but the way Padmasambhava is presented in Tibetan tradition, it's as if the mythological, the cosmic, is much more important than the historical. And we tend to think of things the other way around. You know, if I say someone is a historical character, but there are legends about them, we start thinking, well, then I want to know what's true, because legends, you know, they're untrue. And I was very struck when Abhilasha gave his talk. I don't think Abhilasha thinks like that. Abhilasha is very, very different from me. It was a very personal talk, and those of you who are here will know that Abhilasha's relationship with these figures is quite personal. And I think the reason that for me that is not quite like that is because of something that happened quite early in my childhood. I don't know exactly what age, but I do remember it was the first house which I left when I was 9, so it was before I was 9. And I remember that I used to see all kinds of things at night before I went to sleep. But they weren't dreams, they were in the room. I remember once seeing a troop of dwarves, like, you know, the 7 dwarves, walk across the room and sort of disappear through the wall. And I must have said something to my parents. Some of these things were very pleasant, some of them were quite scary. I must have said something to my parents, and they must have said to me, they're not real. And so on this particular occasion, I was lying in my little bed, and I could see a succession of cats, waiters. So they were standing upright like Tom and Jerry type of cat. And they had, you know, sort of like tuxedo and, you know, that kind of thing. And they were carrying silver platters full of cakes and jellies. And they were going to some big party somewhere. And I can remember sitting up in bed and thinking, but they must be real. They must be. So I reached out, I plucked up my courage, I reached out to touch. And of course, as I touched, they disappeared. But they disappeared forever. So that's, you know, there's a whole side of our psyche which is not best served by our over-rational approach to things in modern society. It's kind of suppressed, it's pushed under, but it still lives within us. It's very powerful side of our own psyches. And a lot of our unconscious reactions are probably to do with our response to images, to symbols. So I think it's very appropriate that when we're dealing with Padmasambhava, we're never quite sure what is historical and what's legendary. And a lot of the images and the aspects of the image are very clearly symbolic. So I want to talk about just 3 of the symbols on Padmasambhava before showing these slides. So the first is on top of his cap. I'm not sure if it's clear in that image, it's a bit clearer in the painting, is a feather. And the feather is a vulture's feather. Now, we probably think of vultures as rather ugly birds. Well, they are when they're on the land, but when they're in the air, they've got an enormous wingspan, and they're the highest flying birds. You think of the condors of the Andes, and in the Himalayas, you get the vultures flying high. So that's the symbolism of flying the highest. So I love birds of prey. I love watching birds of prey. We get them plenty. You know, buzzards are very common in our countryside, and they've reintroduced those red kites all along the motorway that I drove down yesterday. You can see the red kites now. And what's really interesting is seeing them when they're high on the thermals and they're circling around. and they're looking at everything. They have a clear view of everything. And of course, that allows them in a moment when they spot what they were after, just to plummet down directly and take it. But I think the symbolism of the vulture's feather is that Padmasambhava flies so high that he can see everything, as it were, from above. So what does he see when he sees everything? Well, he sees truth itself. He sees reality for what it is. He sees what we can't see because our minds are full of not just delusions, but assumptions, projections, things which get in the way of that understanding. The sort of things that Abhilasha was saying we need to let go of or get rid of. But Padmasambhava has done that. He's enlightened. He sees the truth. And the second symbol I want to draw your attention to is the Vajra. So Padmasambhava holds the Vajra in his hand. He holds it like this, off to one side. And the Vajra, in the sadhana, the visualization practice, it says the Vajra, he holds the Vajra, truth itself. So why is the Vajra truth itself? It's just, you can see one on the shrine. It's a sort of metal implement. No, the Vajra is, Abhilasha said that it cuts through delusion. That's true, but it's not true enough. The Vajra is made up of delusion and realization. It's made up of the mundane world as we experience it and the enlightened world as Padmasambhava experiences it. So the Vajra is one of those objects which is the same on both sides, opposites, and it's joined in the middle. So it symbolizes the fact that what we think of as the mundane world and the enlightened world are not two different worlds. They're two different ways of experiencing the same world, the same reality. Reality is here, it's nowhere else. But we can't see it until we're enlightened, until that moment when we cross over in our perception, in our experience, from one way of looking at things to another way of looking at the same things and seeing them as they really are. So it doesn't mean that the mundane world vanishes and we find ourselves in some heaven world. We just have a different experience of the same world as everybody else. So that's what the Vajra represents, truth itself, but it represents it in this extraordinary way of showing visually that delusion and enlightenment are two sides of the same coin, literally. And then I wanted to draw your attention just to the skull cup. It's a bit buried by the vase of initiation there, but the vase of initiation comes out of a skull cup, and the skull cup is filled with Amrit nectar. So Amrita is a kind of, the most delicious drink you can possibly imagine. It's bliss. It is bliss. So it's shown as a skull cup and it's red. The Amrit nectar is red. It looks like blood. But it's not ordinary blood. It's the bliss that arises when you make that transition, when you see things in a new way, from a new perspective. It's not just a cognitive change, it's an emotional change. It's something that transforms the way you feel. We talk about seeing, but we could equally well talk about transforming the way you feel about things. So the whole way that Padmasambhava is depicted is deeply symbolic. But Padmasambhava goes further than that in his symbolism. So some of you at least will know that the Buddha is sometimes depicted in 5 archetypal forms, one for each of the quarters and one for the central position. And they're different colours, yellow, blue, green, red, and white. And they symbolize different aspects of enlightenment, because it's quite difficult to get your head around enlightenment. It's quite difficult to even intellectually see what enlightenment is. So symbolically, one figure is more to do with compassion, one is more to do with wisdom, and so on. And that's a very important part of the arrangement of symbolism in Tibetan Buddhism. But in the case of Padmasambhava, he has these 8 forms. So you can see them surrounding him on this painting. And these 8 forms represent different types of Buddhist, you could say. Some of them are teachers. One of them is very like the Buddha himself. Another is the kind of mad yogi, the ascetic who does live in the cremation grounds. And some of them are almost like monsters and demons. But each of those 8 forms is an enlightened aspect of Padmasambhava. Now, it's quite hard for us, maybe if you've got a strong imagination, you just look at the forms in the painting and you'll get something from them, especially if you look closely. They've all got names, but I'm not interested in naming them. When we name something, it means we think we know it. And in this case, we have no idea what these forms are, how powerful they are, how compassionate they are, how wise they are. So let's not name them, but let's take them in visually. And years ago at the LBC, the London Buddhist Centre, we tried to put on a sort of modern version of something they do in Tibet to bring these forms alive. They put on a dance. So we had a very talented artist and someone else who did costumes, and also our very own Lalita Raja, who is a professional dancer, showed some of us how to do some basic dance forms. But what was really interesting is that when you put a mask on, you cease to be yourself. You do actually start to become what you're portraying. It's very interesting. You don't see yourself anymore, as it were. It's much easier to get into the plant. And one of the things that we made a sort of rule about putting these dancers on was that we wouldn't tell anybody who was which part. People were very curious, they wanted to know, well, who was that person? No, we wouldn't say, because we didn't feel it was us anymore. It was Padmasambhava. So what I'm going to show you is Padmasambhava coming to the LBC, coming to the London Buddhist Centre. Padmasambhava in his many forms. Let's see if we can start this up. Now he's coming into focus. Here's Padmasambhava entering the LBC shrine. Let's wait for him to appear fully. So this was Padmasambhava coming for the first time to the London Buddhist Centre and appearing before us. This is about 30 years ago now. And here he is. You can take in his beauty, his power, his majesty. And he began to dance through the shrine room. He began to tame the demons that were present there. He began to use his vajra to break through our ignorance. You can see his feather, his vajra, and what he has in his hand is a type of, it's actually a sort of stake, sometimes called a dagger. It's a purva, and it's like a nomadic yurt tent peg, but it's a ritual object, and if you peg something with it, it can't move anymore. So he's pegging down our ignorance so it can't wriggle away. And it was really evocative having Padmasambhava in the shrine room. It gave a real sense of his presence that's difficult to convey just through words. So that was the first year that we had this type of Padmasambhava Day festival there. The next year, some of his 8 forms appeared. Some of the forms are princely, dressed in those kind of Central Asian silks. Some of the forms are so powerful they seem like demons themselves. And the next year, each form made an individual appearance. So this is the form of Padmasambhava that's like the Buddha, that is dressed in a simple robe and has a begging bowl. This form of Padmasambhava is like what's called an Adi Buddha, a primordial Buddha, the Buddha at the center of enlightenment, as it were. And each form is there to liberate, to ring the bell, to remind us of what we're missing. This form is like an Indian or Tibetan pandita, a teacher, a scholar monk, but in this case an enlightened one. Ready to pass the Dharma on to others. And here's another princely form entering the shrine room, bringing its own unique essence. And here's a yogi, someone dressed in bone ornaments. Padmasambhava as a yogi, someone who lives maybe in the cremation grounds, is entirely fearless, consorts there with the Dakinis, covered in a garland of skulls and bones. Challenging us to be fearless. And an ecstatic, kingly form of Padmasambhava, bringing bliss as well as wisdom. And a wrathful form. powerful beyond belief. And another wrathful form. All of them forms of Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava emanating, as it were, these different aspects of his enlightened being. So hopefully that gives you a bit more of a sense, a felt sense of Padmasambhava.